Okay, morning everyone. I think we'll make a start. I know that some people will be joining us over the next few minutes, which is fantastic. So welcome to the third in our series of 4 mental health and wellbeing webinars. I'm Isla Newcombe, Chief Officer for People and Organisational Development. And just really pleased once again to welcome you to this session. We're going to be working jointly with Sam H, Scotland's largest mental health charity, for the session today. And in a moment, I'll hand over to Liam and Carmel, who will take us through the session. Today's session is all about effective conversations. So it will be really focused and practical. The important thing about today is that it's not simply about conversations in crisis. It's so important that we're having regular conversations with our colleagues, with people that we line manage, and that we're having as open conversations as we can do around mental health. That's the only way that we will reduce stigma and create a culture where these types of open conversations kind of are able to happen. And that means that hopefully we can mitigate against and reduce, the occasions where people may actually find themselves in crisis in the first place. So it's not just about that crisis point. It is, as with many of the things that we do and the people that we work with, it's about early intervention and prevention always, and being supportive, creating a culture where we are supportive and listening to each other. So that's all I wanted to say this morning. Fantastic again to see you all, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you either towards the end of the session or in the coming days and weeks. So I will hand over to Liam, I think is on the call somewhere.
Yeah, morning folks. Thanks, Isla. Today we're going to look at effective conversations and communication. And as Isla rightly said, often when we're talking about mental health, we assume that these conversations only take place at point of crisis. So whilst we'll absolutely cover that off in this session, we'll also look at actually we have to create that culture throughout the workplace so that conversations around about mental health don't only happen when somebody's in crisis. So we'll look at various elements of sort of the wellness action plans that we've spoken about over the last couple of weeks as well. Okay, and we'll just make a start then, folks. So as we said, it's looking at effective conversations and communication. So I suppose one of the things we're going to look at to begin with is triggers and early warning signs, because we need to know, well, when are we going to have these conversations? Why am I going to have these conversations? What have I seen? What have I heard? What have I sensed? What have I learned about someone that suggests maybe I should have a conversation with them about mental health? And we're going to spend a bit of time, obviously, about having that conversation. We'll look at some of the responses we get. So, sometimes when we speak to people regarding their well-being or their mental health, we'll get an angry response, or they'll be angry about the situation. So we'll look at how do we deal with that. We'll look at how do we deal with things like confidentiality and the disclosure of thoughts of harming themselves or other people. And we'll spend a bit of time looking at actually, in order to do all of this, in order to make these conversations easier for everyone and to ensure that these conversations don't happen just at crisis point, we need to create that healthy culture throughout the workplace. So we'll take you through some of the wellness action plans and wellness recovery action planning as well. We'll look at some helpful and unhelpful tips around about having the conversation. And then, as per the last 2 sessions, we'll look at sort of some of the limitations you have as a colleague, as a manager, as a human being, and also making sure that you're looking after yourself with some of the sort of 5 ways to better mental health. So as per the last couple of sessions, I better think of a fact or something that I can remember. Okay, so triggers. So what is a trigger? What is something that could set somebody off within their workplace? And that's something that's really important that we think about, especially given the change in working arrangements that a number of us are facing at the moment. What could trigger someone's mental health within work or even without work, but we could see that trigger impacting on that person's work. So, it's an event or a situation that may lead to someone's mental health dipping. And there are a number of triggers that we can see. And some of the most common ones, I suppose, we've put on this list here. This list is potentially endless. And there's also a number of things on this list that all of us will have faced at some point potentially in our life. moving home, Christmas, these types of things that actually not necessarily would have impacted our mental health. So we'll look at that as well. The difficulty with triggers as well is something might happen out with someone's work, and you might not have any idea of that as a staff manager or as a people manager or as a colleague, but it still will impact their work. So one of the things that we have to be aware of when we're supporting somebody with their mental health is there's an awful lot of things out with our control. So this want that we sometimes have to control and to fix things just because we're being supportive people, actually straight away that's out the window before we even start the conversation, because the trigger or the event that's happened in that person's life actually isn't anything that we can support necessarily within the workplace. The ones that are in pink here tend to be the ones that are more related to work, and obviously we've highlighted and underlined that change in work hours or conditions, because almost every one of us over the last 6 months has seen our working pattern changed in some way, be it the hours we work, be it the job we do, or be it where we work from. For those of us who are home based now, we've seen huge changes in that. And for a number of people that has been a trigger. And often with triggers, I suggest that we actually start to think about ourselves. What would affect my mental health if it was to happen, and how would that impact my day? And for me, for example, the change in working conditions, we moved house during lockdown, and I would never suggest doing that. But we were in, when we were waiting on our new property being ready, we stayed, and our old property we'd left that. We stayed in temporary accommodation, and it was a flat, and I've not stayed in a flat for years. So actually, the two of us living there, our workplace was our living room, but it was also the place that we lived. So we came to resent that place quite a lot, and that did trigger, or could potentially be triggers in our mental health. So that change in conditions can have a massive knock-on effect. So being aware of things and being aware when changes are happening throughout our teams, throughout our businesses, being aware that for a number of our staff, that could trigger a dip in their mental health. So making sure that we're asking people how they're doing, we're asking people how they feel in regards to changes. And I think the big thing to be aware of, it's not necessarily the trigger event, but it's how it makes that individual feel. So actually, we might be rolling out something to our staff that actually seems relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but to them, that could be something massive. It could be that final straw. It could be something that really affects them. So being aware when we're talking about triggers, it's not necessarily something that would impact our mental health, but that doesn't mean that it won't impact other people. So we have to be aware about the feeling behind the trigger rather than the trigger itself. But as I said, sometimes we're not aware of what that trigger is. So what we have to be, what we can be aware of sometimes is the early warning signs. So, it's that early indication that things aren't well. So what are we seeing in people? What are we hearing from people? What are we sensing from people? What are we learning from people that suggests that things are starting to dip? Early warning signs can be really useful. Again, they can be quite hidden, but it can be little subtle changes, behaviors, mood, appearance. Even things like, if you normally see somebody on Teams with their camera on all the time, and then all of a sudden that dips off, it's worth checking that just to make sure that it's not anything relating to their mental health. It could be because they've got people in the background. It could be because they don't feel like sharing their living environment at that time. But all these little things worth checking in with. Poor timekeeping, so you can, if you know when people are normally logged on, or if you've still got staff coming to work, potentially running late, drop in performance, change in attitudes, even their appearance. If you're used to seeing somebody, clean shaven, smartly dressed, for example, all the time, and there's a change in that. So it's the change from what's normal for their behaviour, and that's what's worth looking at, and that's sometimes an easier thing to pick up on rather than the triggers, especially if we don't know that person particularly well. And now is the time to have the conversation. So early warning signs, rather than waiting until somebody gets into a crisis situation, actually let's have the conversation with somebody when they first start to show symptoms, when they're first starting to become unwell, because it's a much easier conversation to have, but it's also much easier to get that person back to a place that they maybe want to be, and support them back to that place, rather than waiting until they're way downstream and they're in crisis and trying to get the support available for them. So as soon as we think there's something happening with somebody, that's when we have to have that conversation, you know, and it makes it much easier for us. It can be scary for us, and sometimes we put off having conversations about mental health, and we keep putting it off and we keep putting it off until it gets to a point where we think, I really need to have this conversation now. But sometimes by that point, it becomes really difficult to have that conversation, because things have reached a level of distress or crisis, and things have become so complex that actually supporting that person becomes much harder, and sometimes that's where we need to bring in other sort of mental health support. So if we can have that conversation, and we can be brave about creating that culture where it's okay to have these conversations and okay to ask questions of people, having it as early doors as we can actually makes it easier for everybody involved. But again, we know that can be scary, can be difficult sometimes. I'm going to watch a video quickly. It's from the Mental Health Foundation, and they've got a video that's sort of 5-6 minutes long about mental health at work, supporting someone. We'll share these resources afterwards as well, but it's got some nice useful tips for managers there as well. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and we will get back to sharing the one about the video as well. So let me just open this up. Hopefully everybody can see and hear this. Obviously, let me know, put your hand up or give me a shout if you can't.
Royal Mail Group has worked with national charity Mental Health Foundation to produce a series of short films on mental health and well-being for staff. This film is about the ways you can support someone when they are going through a difficult time.
It's particularly difficult to talk about mental ill health in a work environment. People are obviously fearful about how they'll be seen by their employer and by their colleagues as well. We know that there's a lot of stigma attached to mental health issues. I think people are very aware. They pick it up from conversations people have, their attitudes. It's very important to give a compassionate response when somebody opens up to you for the first time. You will have lots of times when you have conversations with people that you line manage. Those might be informal conversations where you're just making a coffee with somebody, or it might be through a formal conversation, for example, through supervision. It's just a real opportunity in supervision to talk about how people are doing, if they're having any kind of issues. If somebody is off sick, and if they're off sick with a mental health issue, treat them in the same ways as if they had a physical health problem. Send somebody a card, I'd text them to check in if they're okay. I'd give them that message that they're missed, and we look forward to having them back soon. I would always think about asking somebody if they have a problem. If there's indications that you're seeing yourself or other people in the team, maybe you're mentioning that somebody just doesn't seem to be very well, or they know that there's sort of something stressful happening in their lives. It's a compassionate thing to do, just to check in with somebody.
It's really a huge relief when you get to speak to someone that you trust and tell them about your concerns and your feelings. And also giving me the opportunities to work from home or reduced hours, and just having someone there to listen to you, even if they don't know what to say necessarily, but they're just there to support you.
It might be that you want to suggest meeting up socially with somebody, go for a walk, go and have a coffee somewhere. Just make it a comfortable environment for somebody to open up and talk to you. What's helpful is for you to be prepared, not necessarily to anticipate that this is going to be a very difficult, concerning conversation, but to be ready if it goes down a track where you actually are concerned for somebody's mental health. You might be needing to talk to them about what kind of support do they have at the moment. Is there somebody they can talk to? Had they thought about talking maybe to their GP? And part of the preparation, I think, is having that information ready to hand, so that if you're in a situation where somebody obviously does need some support and support quickly, you can immediately provide them with the information. It's really important to listen to somebody, particularly if this is the first time that they've spoken to you about their issues. There's lots of ways that you can communicate that you are listening to them in a really genuine and compassionate way. Keep eye contact with the person, to communicate through your body language that you're engaged, and to give them a bit of space. Often if we're listening to something that makes us feel uncomfortable, we can maybe cut across somebody or interrupt them or appear distracted, and it's really important that you're able to hold all of those responses when somebody discloses something to you. It's really important, no matter what you're hearing somebody talk about, that you don't become judgmental. You can communicate judgment through what you're saying, but also through your body language. One of the things that I find really helpful when somebody's telling me something that I'm finding difficult to hear is I just try and stay very conscious of myself. I keep my feet firmly placed on the ground. I try to concentrate on my breathing and stay calm with somebody. Reassurance can really give people hope that this is something that they can come through. It gives them hope that they'll be supported in their workplace as well, that they'll be able to keep their job and keep the relationships that they have at work, as well as to give them hope about recovering their mental health. You don't need to be a mental health professional to make a difference.
Okay, folks, so hopefully you can all hear me again and see the slides again, but I quite like that video in regards to, you know, at the very beginning, they liken it that, you know, if somebody came in with a physical injury, we would talk about that, and actually let's start treating, you know, mental health, let's start treating these early warning signs the same. You know, if somebody came into your office with their leg in a plaster cast or they were limping, you know, we would straight away, we would mention that to them, we would have that conversation with them. But because of some of the stigma and the fear that surrounds mental health, sometimes we shy away from those types of conversations. But actually, the chances of somebody needing a mental health support and a conversation round about their mental health are obviously far higher than those needing support for their physical health. So, you know, let's try and get into the habit of encouraging those conversations and talking to each other and spotting these early warning signs. And sometimes by thinking, you know, what would I do if this was a physical condition? Actually, it makes it easier for us to have those conversations. But as I say, these video links will be sent out to you, so you know you can watch them obviously at any time going forward as well. Now, we showed this slide previously, and it's one we kind of we show in a number of our courses, because actually the having the conversation, if somebody is in potentially crisis, or you know, even if they've not reached that point, it remains quite similar. It remains, you know, the same sort of steps that we go through. So we need to prepare, you know, what are we doing? Why are we having this conversation? What have I noticed? How am I going to approach this? And obviously, where am I going to have this conversation? And you know, if you're having this conversation over Microsoft Teams, over Zoom, over, you know, any of these virtual platforms, just ensure that, you know, what have you done to control as much of the environment as you can, so that actually it feels like that person is your sole responsibility. So, you know, are there kids in the background? Are there pets? Is your partner in the background? Are we having technology issues like we do today? You know, is somebody else using the bandwidth? And does that mean that you know your video link is lessened? Because the last thing we want is other things to be distracting or taking away or seem to be taking away your priority from that person. So prepare your environment, get comfortable with your environment, and have an idea of the things you're going to ask them. And do ask them how they are. You know, it's okay to ask people how they're doing, and use the invitations that you've potentially seen from that person. So, you know, I've noticed the language you're using. I've noticed, you know, the behaviours that you've seen. You know, I just want to check, is everything okay? Sometimes you will get dismissed. You'll maybe get bat away, but you know, make sure you're showing that, well, I'm only asking you because I care, and I've noticed X, Y, and Z, and I was really worried about you, and I just wanted to check on you. So make sure it's that empathic, that response, that empathic response that's really important that we're having, and you can frame that question using the the things you've seen, much as we spoke about in the webinar last week when we were asking about suicide and how difficult that can be. Actually, by framing that question with what we've seen can make it a lot easier. And then giving that person that space to share that load and speak about what's going on for them and hear what they're saying, trying to use our non-verbal skills once we've started talking, try not to interrupt or dismiss concerns. So it can be things like encouraging nods and smiling, and body language makes up so much of our communication, and a lot of that is taken away during remote support and remote conversations. So actually that means we have to be almost extra vigilant to the things that we're hearing, and it can be really difficult for us to show that we're listening when we can't show body language, but it can be really, really difficult for us to pick up on kind of non-verbal signs as well that person might be struggling. So we have to be really, really vigilant and attuned to the things that we hear if we're not sharing cameras, for example. Being objective as well is really important. We want to keep it grounded and we want to keep it focused and make sure that the conversations we're having at that time, it's about that person's well-being. It's not necessarily, about their role at that time. It's about who they are as a person, and then absolutely those conversations might at some point move on to, the impact that their role has on their well-being. But at the moment of time, it's about having that conversation about that person. So, sometimes things like we saw in the video, having a cup of coffee, so having a virtual cup of coffee rather than sitting down with kind of, Aberdeen City Council headed paper and right, tell me about your deepest, darkest thoughts, potentially someone's going to close up. So that friendly, open, welcoming response, but keeping things objective and focused about them and their well-being. We don't need to fix it. It's a huge thing that we try to do. And it's lovely when people try and do that, because actually it shows how much you care about that person. It shows that you want to support that person to the best of their ability. But actually, we can't, as colleagues, as managers, we can't fix somebody's financial problems. We can't fix somebody's relationship problems. There might be things that we can do within work to support their well-being, but we certainly can't fix it. So be aware that we try and offer advice, and we try and tell people what they need to do, or tell people how they fix this, for example. But actually, we often can't fix it. So don't worry if you can't come up with solutions that are suddenly going to make things better for people. Nobody's asking you to do that. What we're looking for you to do is spot the signs, listen to what they're saying, and then ensuring that we're passing that person on to that appropriate support. So what do we need to do next? What will help? Who will help? And reminding them that support is available and exploring about how that could be done. That conversation won't just stop for potentially when we pass them on to somebody else. We might want to check in with that person again. We might want to diarise support for them once they've maybe been and spoken to that other supporter that we're looking for them to get further help from. They might not need further support at that time. Actually having that conversation with you and knowing we've had that conversation early enough that actually it's not going to get worse, but they know that if things do start to unravel, that they can come back to you. So encouraging that open communication, and that you take your time and you care and highlight to that person what you have seen and what you've heard, to make sure you're on the same wavelength. A lot of reflective language. I'm hearing this, you're telling me this, and is that correct? Asking that person as well, sometimes, what do they think will help them? They've come to you for a reason, or you've noticed what's going on for them. So actually, what do you think would help them? And trying to get, I suppose, as close to that support as possible. If we are passing that person on to another supporter, so be it, another line manager, be it HR, be it the employee assistance program, be it one of our mental health first aiders, or even an external supporter, if possible, let's try and hand them off warmly. Let's try and do that introduction rather than just giving that person a name and number and telling them a way to phone it, because it's far more likely that they will engage with that support if you're able to kind of warmly hand them off to that support and warmly introduce them to that support. So have a knowledge of what supports are available. It's really key that we don't wait until we're in a crisis situation ourselves trying to support someone else, and we're scrambling around trying to find supports. Have a knowledge of what the supports within the organisation or available through the organisation offer, and actually how they've helped people in the past and how they can help the people you work with, because then it means being able to introduce that support becomes a lot easier for you. And actually what you find, although that initial conversation might take longer than you'd planned for, actually in the long run you will save time, because you'll cut out the kind of cyclic behaviours that we often see, where, well, every week I'm getting this person coming in and they're saying the same things and we're going through the same things. It's about moving that support on to the next step, where they're not that revolving door, they're not coming back. Because if they're coming back every day or every week, you know, that's great, it shows they trust you, but it also shows potentially that we've not maybe supported that person to the way that we want to be able to allow them to move on, or for them to be able to move on with their support. So trying to encourage them with support and making sure we're getting feedback from them once they've seen that supporter, and once we've engaged with that supporter, can be really, really key. It doesn't just stop, you know, the one time we have that conversation. We will probably want to pick up with them again, check in on how that went for them, and again, you know, seeing where we are and what supports do they need to move forward from there.
Hi Liam, before moving on, it's Carmel. We've got
Hi,
a few
Carmel.
good questions in the chat box.
Fantastic.
I know some of them you might be thinking of answering as we continue through the session, so up to you if you want to address now or not, but let me share them on behalf of the group. So the first one is from Sharon. She's asking, what happens if the person has a mental illness and is acting out in the workplace, a victim or bully? I saw this once and I wondered what the right thing to do was. Okay,
yeah, so I suppose it's a great question, and I'm just reading it here on the chat. So what happens if the person has a mental illness and is acting out in the workplace, a victim or a bully? So there's a couple of different things there. You know, if somebody feels that they're getting discriminated against because of their mental health, and they're that victim element, you know, it's encouraging that support, encouraging what they've seen, and trying to support them. The bullying side of things, you know, I'm Sharon, I'm just trying to understand the question. You know, if it's them now showing bullying tendencies and they're blaming it, or not blaming it, they're saying it's related to their mental health. You know, poor mental health will sometimes explain you know, behaviours, but it doesn't always excuse them. So, you know, we have to make sure that actually the support that we're offering someone, and the behaviours that they're showing, fall within the parameters of that workplace as well. I worked with a call centre once, and we supported a woman there who understandably got to a point where she was afraid of answering the telephone because she'd had a very abusive call. Now, they tried everything in their power to be able to support her and move forward with that. And it took years, it took months and maybe even years. And actually it got to the point where, you know, her and the company agreed that it wasn't the best place for her to work anymore, because she physically couldn't do the job without it impacting her mental health. And, you know, they looked at helping her to join other teams, email teams, these types of things, but actually she realised within her own mental health, and they realised as an organisation. So, you know, being aware that we don't want to assume that, you know, mental health is being used as an excuse for somebody's behaviour, because they still have to fall within the kind of parameters of the workplace. But actually, we still need to, I suppose, support that. And I think some of the things we're going to come on to, the understanding and dealing with anger and aggression and things, might be able to answer some of that. Thanks, Carmel.
Thanks, Liam. And the next one we've got in the chat box is from Catherine. So I think this is a question us at SAMH hear quite often. If the person who you're worried about denies that anything is wrong or dismisses your concerns, how long should you wait before attempting the conversation again?
Yeah, again, a great question. And I think that's something that is one of our biggest worries, and it's something that happens quite a lot. You know, we ask somebody about their mental health and they tell us they're fine, and actually deep down we know they're not fine, and we know that they struggle. For me, I tend to go back immediately at that point. You know, I always ask twice. You know, I always say, you know, ask twice at least. So I will say, well, you know, great to hear that you're you say you're fine, but you know, I'm only asking you because I really care about you and I was worried about you because I noticed X, Y, and Z. And actually, you know, don't worry, you're not in trouble. I just want to make sure that that we can support you to the best of our abilities and make sure that we can support you in a way that you want. That caring, compassionate response immediately can be really helpful, because often we worry that, well, if somebody's asking me about my mental health, what are they going to do with this information? And there's so much stigma surrounds mental health, you know, and it goes all the way back, you know, if the police are asking me about my mental health, am I going to get lifted? You know, if social workers are asking me about my mental health, you know, am I going to lose my kids? So all these unhelpful and negative and untrue stigmas that exist around mental health mean that we sometimes can be quite protective of that. So actually, by giving that caring, compassionate response, highlighting again why I've asked, what I've seen, and it's because I want to help you, can be really key. Again, if you're getting a no from there, you don't want to necessarily leave it too long. So, or you maybe want to see about getting a colleague, you know, speaking to a colleague about it, saying, you know, I've noticed this about such and such, and just wondering if you could highlight to them that you've maybe seen it as well, and that you want to support them. It always depends. It also always depends on the relationship that you have with that person. You know, I find it really hard to support people I'm quite emotionally close to, so friends and family members. And actually they find that difficult as well, because we are emotionally close. So if you're very close to your teams and the people you're trying to support, you know, whilst that can be really good to build that kind of camaraderie, actually it can sometimes make a mental health conversation more difficult. And actually sometimes another manager or another colleague being able to support that person can be easier. So I would always ask again for a second time immediately. You then might have to leave it a day or two. The only time I would obviously really escalate that immediately further, and any time, and I would always do this, is if I thought there was an immediate risk to themselves or to another person. And that doesn't just necessarily mean death, you know, that could be harming themselves as well. I would always escalate that probably to a 999 response if I wasn't able to get through, if you thought there was an immediate risk of harm or death to themselves or another person. But asking twice straight away or trying to get another colleague involved can be really useful there as well. But great question. Anything else, Carmel?
No, not at the moment. Thanks, Liam.
No, fantastic. But as I say, folks, keep using the chat box to ask questions as we go through, because sometimes rather than having questions at the end, when they can almost see that, well, where did they fit in, actually asking them when we're on the relevant slide can be really, really useful. So we spoke about there that sometimes when we ask people that, they'll say they're fine even though we're not, but actually sometimes when we ask people, we might get an angry response as well. I don't want this, I'm not putting this slide off there to up there to put you off having that conversation, but it's just to highlight that sometimes we can get a negative response. I've spoken to people hundreds of times about their well-being and their mental health, and I could probably count on one hand how many times I've actually had an angry response. And generally they're not angry at me, you know, they're generally angry at that situation. They're angry about what's happened. And anger can be quite a healthy emotion. It can sometimes be what helps us release, you know, how we're feeling and increase our well-being. But it does become a problem when it potentially gets out of control and can lead to harm of them or other people around them. So, you know, outward aggression and violence, inward aggression or non-violent and passive aggression can be really unhelpful ways of dealing with anger. You speak to a lot of, you know, if you read books about sports psychology and things, a lot of people will say it's the anger that actually gives them that drive, but they have to control that anger to a certain extent to prevent it spilling out on the kind of the playing field and things. But so anger can be really useful. It can give us a bit of drive, but it tends to be a word that we associate with kind of very negative behavior. So sometimes in those three examples, anger does become negative, and it's about ensuring that we support that as much as we can. And again, it's really tough, and it's so easy for me to put up on a slide and say this is what you need to do, but you know, try to react to the feeling rather than the behavior. So you know, what's happening, what's making you feel this way, what's making you, I can see you're angry, what's making you feel that you're angry. I understand that you're angry, but I want to support you with that. Let's try and get to the bottom of that. And you know, it's it's about de-escalation, and that can be challenging sometimes, because we can sometimes be, frightened of their behaviour. So take a deep breath before we react. Try to make sure that we engage our brain quicker than we're engaging our mouth sometimes, because that can be really challenging. You might even have to leave the room or the call until you're both feeling calmer. I'm sure you've had conversations, and it's probably more common that it's been conversations with people in your personal life, growing up with parents, or those of you who have teenagers with them, etc., that actually you've both said something and it's just escalated the situation. So sometimes by taking 5 minutes and saying, you know what, I'm going to give you a call back, go and get yourself a cup of tea, I'm going to get a cup of tea, we'll come back, we'll have a conversation, and we'll talk through this once the emotions have calmed down a bit. So trying to stay calm as well can be really, really challenging, and remembering that it's not necessarily you. Acknowledge their feelings, and if you're face to face, try to keep your body language open and calm and non-threatening, and potentially trying to mirror theirs, and ensuring that there is support available and that you want to help them, but you need them to be able to communicate with you what's wrong, and sometimes that has to de-escalate. I've worked with people where anger has been a real issue. Before I worked for SAMH, I worked in criminal justice, and a lot of the time we used to communicate initially was we would get people to write things down. So, via emails, we would get people just to write letters and things, because sometimes that can take that impulsivity out of it. I've seen me doing support via text message and things as well, and it just allows that to calm down. So I suppose going back to, was it Catherine's question about asking people, if you don't get a positive response, sometimes by following up by email or by text message can be really useful. It was great that you took time to speak to me earlier. The reasons I was asking you X, Y, and Z was because I noticed this and I was really worried about you, and I really want to support you. These are some of the ways I think I can support you. If you want to come back, do so. And actually we find that conversation can start a lot more readily via emails or via text messages. We get a lot of people will message SAMH through social media rather than pick up the phone to them, because they find it easier to type it or to write it. Samaritans have a text service now that they find can often be far busier, especially amongst younger people, than their telephone lines, because actually people don't have to verbalize their things. So trying to find different ways to deal with that anger and deal with that, I suppose, withdrawal from that communication, from that conversation, can be really, really key and can be really, really useful. The other thing we might come across is we might get disclosure about people's will or want to harm themselves or to harm other people. So being aware of what confidentiality means, and ensuring that that person we're having that conversation with knows what confidentiality means. Because for a lot of people out there, when you ask them what confidentiality means, they will say, oh, well, I can tell you and you're not going to tell anyone else. And actually, that's not what confidentiality means. So whilst we're not going to gossip about things and share it throughout teams and throughout their colleagues, actually, we need to be able to know, and that person needs to know, that if they tell us something, we might need to take support from other people. So it's that sharing of relevant information with the right people at the right time is vital to good safeguarding practice. So that could be if somebody discloses thoughts of suicide or self-harm or harming someone else, trying to stay calm and listen, don't judge or try to fix anything, don't minimize it, give them space. And it's okay not to know what to say, but knowing that you should and will want to speak to somebody else. Confidentiality as well, sometimes we use that as a barrier to getting support for ourselves as the caregiver. If we have a conversation with somebody about their mental health, even if it goes well, it's still potentially a stressful conversation. So really important that we are getting that support for somebody. And that doesn't mean we necessarily have to use somebody's name if we're going to another manager or if we're going to our own line manager. It's making sure that, I've had this situation, this is what I've said, this is what they've said, and being able to get that debrief for yourself as well. So be aware, have a think about, have a read up on it if need be. I know policies aren't the most exciting things to read sometimes, but have a think about your confidentiality policies, your safeguarding policies. Who would you tell and how would you tell somebody if you were needing to get that support for that person or for yourselves? And how do you ensure that that person you're having that conversation with is aware of, you know, the clauses in regards to confidentiality, but also being able to have that conversation with them without then closing them down about what they want to share. So it can be a really challenging one to want to have. But, you know, any information you are sharing, again, it's highlighting to that person, it's only because I care, and it's only because, you know, I want to ensure that that, you know, things are improving for you. As you know, as the suicide prevention manager, most of my work is done in suicide prevention, and a number of that times that has been involved supporting somebody in crisis. But actually, one of the big things, you know, often I have to do is involve the police. And actually, when I do that, it can give people a lot of fear. But by explaining to them, this is why I've done this, it's only because I care, it's only because I want to make sure you get the best support available, generally that can help de-escalate that situation. So be aware of anger, be aware of disclosure, because these are the things that sometimes come up in conversations that we're concerned about. So going to watch another quick video. The first session we watched a video called Black Dog Depression, which showed a journey of somebody with depression, how it manifested itself and how it took over them. And then in the second half of that video, it showed, you know, once they'd got treatment, the improvements that it did make. This one is a guide for carers and supporters. Now, a lot of the video is aimed at, you know, if it's your partner or if it's your friend, but actually there's a lot of the conversation that goes on in this video we can implement and we can take into the workplace. So I'm going to share, stop sharing the slides, and I'm going to share this video as well. Somebody else is sharing. If they're able to pop that off just to make sure I'm able to share, that would be lovely. And again, this video will be shared, but if you were to Google living with a black dog, you would get the information.
Living with a Black Dog, a guide for partners, carers and sufferers. What not to say or do. You may well be right when you say, it's all in your head, but don't say it. Leave that up to the professionals. Be a man. This certainly doesn't help, especially if they are one already. Depression is an illness, not a sign of weakness. Don't be an armchair general who gives unfounded advice and orders. Being thoughtful and kind will never go amiss, but don't try and jolly them along. It can often make them feel worse. Don't point out that there are people in this world far worse off than them. It just adds to their feelings of guilt and hopelessness. Good things to say and do. Be sensitive about how you approach the subject. A lot of people aren't used to talking about their mental health, or lack of it. Crossing that line simply means you care. Try not talking. Instead, grow your ears and open your heart. Really being there for someone without opinion or judgment is one of the best gifts you can ever give. Encourage them to seek a professional opinion and offer to help find a good doctor, make an appointment, and even going with them can be hugely beneficial. Encourage any form of regular exercise. Fitness robs the dog of its power. Help them develop a strategy to simplify their life, both at home and at work. Stress is one of the biggest drivers of depression. Less stress means less dog. Make them a ditch the dog box. Encourage them to fill it with favourite photographs, letters, or anything that reminds them of what's good in their life. Include a dog journal. Here they can plot how they're feeling, acknowledge progress, record the things they're grateful for, and set doable goals. Embracing the black dog. Agree to a course of action to get rid of the black dog. An ignored dog can become a big problem. Learn about the condition together. Knowledge is power, and validation is a great healer. A united front is crucial in getting the black dog to move on. As a caregiver, compassion, empathy, and understanding are vital, but recognise that you alone don't have the power to rescue your loved one. Professional help is often what's needed. Finding the right doctor can make all the difference to a healthy recovery. If they're going to tell someone their problems, it should be someone they respect and feel comfortable with. Don't be afraid to go for an initial assessment, and don't feel committed to continue if it doesn't feel right. If it's suggested you take antidepressants, do your research, know the facts, and ask your doctor plenty of questions. A big obstacle for seeking professional help is the cost. Help them realise that the cost of not getting the right help can be considerably higher. It can cost marriages, friendships, jobs, and even life itself. Some simple rules of engagement and agreement. Agree that there is a black dog in your midst and things may have to change temporarily. Agree that no one can help them until they fully commit to helping themselves. Agree to be gentle and respectful with one another during this time. Agree to check in with each other on a regular basis. Agree to communicate honestly and openly. Agree to the course of action set by their doctor and to review progress regularly. Self-preservation for the caregiver. It can be difficult not to take anger, criticism, negativity, and apathy personally. It's important not to buy into it. Accept that it's the depression barking, not the person you care for. Being overexposed to someone else's black dog can begin to rub off. Misery loves company, so try not to get sucked into the vortex. It's really important to recognise and honour your own needs, limitations, and boundaries. Difficult situations are better dealt with when you are calm and in the moment. Yoga, meditation, and mindfulness are great tools for achieving calmness and control. Join a support group. There's nothing like being in a room full of people who understand and share your story. It's important to get out and do your own thing and be with friends. Friends may not be able to solve your problems, but they can offer incredible support, comfort, wisdom, and laughter. A black dog in any relationship can be confronting, frightening, and frustrating. But navigated together, the bond can become deeper, richer, and better for it. And finally, the most important aspect of this journey is to constantly remind each other, it will pass, it will pass, it will pass.
Okay, folks, so as I said, a number of things in that video relate to, if you were a personal caregiver, but actually we can take a lot of the things into a workplace setting in regards to this looking for support, the way we might feel when we're confronted with anger and rejection, the way it might impact them. Obviously, as well, throughout that video, they mention the cost of, access and support. Absolutely, there are some services in the UK that people will have to pay for, but we're lucky that we live in a country where the NHS, we have that National Health Service and we have that free health service. But I suppose one of the things to highlight from that is actually the cost of not getting support can be great in an emotional sense rather than just in a financial sense. So I've spoken in depth there about, I suppose, having the conversations, and actually a lot of those conversations have been about, when we're going to get anger and when we're going to get disclosure and how we have conversations in point of crisis. But, as Isla said right at the beginning, and as I've said throughout, conversations about mental health don't just happen at crisis point, and actually they're the hardest ones to have, and they're the ones we want to try and avoid having as much as possible. And one of the ways to do that is by creating a mentally healthy culture. We want to make sure that people aren't getting to the point where they feel they have to wait until they're in crisis to ask for support. And we want to make sure that we're comfortable enough in having these conversations early doors with people. So we're going to share some details on wellness action plans, which is something we've spoken about in previous sessions that you've said you'd be interested in kind of finding out more about. Now, one of the big things we look at is by getting, mental health a conversation topic we'll speak about regularly. And hopefully, the amount of you that have come to these 4 seminars and the questions you've asked shows the kind of passion and the knowledge and the want for to be able to help people you guys have. So trying to create this mentally healthy culture, you know, trying to make sure that the mental health is something that we speak about on a fairly regular basis. You know, next week is Suicide Prevention Week. You know, might be worthwhile at some point through that, if you're having a morning Teams meeting, is just highlighting to the team that actually, you know, is Suicide Prevention Week. These are some of the resources that are available. You know, make sure we're looking out for people, be aware of some of the stats, etc., etc. Try to create that culture. One of the things we do with our staff, can everyone just check they're on mute, sorry. One of the things we do with our staff is we get them to fill out wellness action plans. And some of the questions we ask, we will show you shortly. So use this WRAP, the Wellness Action Plan, to increase self-awareness and mental health awareness, and that can be really helpful. To encourage that. So, you know, one of the things we get people to think about, and again, we've got a guidance booklet that'll come out, so don't feel you need to write these questions down, is trying to get people to think about what do they do to maintain their well-being and what must they continue doing. You know, because there will be things we all do that keep us well, or not keep us necessarily well, but stop us becoming unwell. So what do I continue to do to maintain my well-being? Is there anything I need to stop? And that can be really challenging sometimes, is thinking about what is affecting my well-being, how do I do that? If I notice I'm becoming unwell, what do I need to do? And who do I need to tell? And if someone notices, what do I want them to do? So actually that can be really key. Having a plan, having it written down on paper can be really, really useful when it comes to actually, if I do become unwell, this is what I've said I think will help me. And what's really important with the wellness action plans is we get staff and we get ourselves to complete them when we're well. These aren't things to complete when we're unwell. These are things to complete when we're well. So, you know, have a think about it and get people to complete them on their own. You know, it's not something where you say, right, I'm going to give you 5 minutes and we'll go through this. Try and get them to realize the importance of it and have a think about that. And for me, that would start with you guys. Take some of these questions away and try and answer them yourselves for yourselves. Be aware of strengths. We're very good at thinking about our negatives. You know, the chances are if you ask the majority of people in the UK, tell me 10 strengths and 10 weaknesses about yourself, we'll find the weakness list a lot easier, and actually we'll find that's probably the first one we start filling out. But actually it's really important we're aware of the things we're good at, because we're all good at stuff. You know, so what are you good at? What do you enjoy? Who cares about you? And who do you care about? All these things can be really, really valuable and help us with our kind of fulfillment of life and our well-being. So getting people to kind of change that mindset almost, to think of more that strength-based approach and the strengths that they have as people. Getting people to be aware of, are they mentally healthy at work? You know, if so, brilliant. What keeps them that way? Is it colleagues? Is it manageable? Is it their own skills? Is it their job role? If you're not mentally healthy at work, have a think about that and what needs to change and how do you change it and what support do you need from yourself, from your family, from your colleagues, from your organisation to do that. And good mental health at work doesn't just come down to management. It just doesn't come down to the organisation. It has to be that kind of whole company approach. So actually, I as an individual have to take personal responsibility for my well-being. Am I taking a lunch break? Am I leaving my desk? Do I leave on at night and each time? Do I take my work home with me? If I'm working from home, am I able to kind of tidy my work away to a place that I don't use? Am I able to dedicate a room to an office? Am I checking work emails at home out with normal working hours because my work has come into my home? You know, does my manager know if I'm struggling? Because they're not necessarily mind readers. Am I telling them in a productive way if my workload becomes too much? So, you know, all these things that we are responsible for, you know, ensuring that we've got that healthy work-time balance. How can your manager support you? You know, what do you need? Is it regular one-to-one meetings? Is it open dialogue? Is it flexi time? All these things are really important questions for us to ask ourselves, and making sure that, you know, we write a couple of sentences and we fill that out and we know what can potentially help. Have you got any specific work-related triggers? What impacts your mental health at work? You know, is there something in particular that could impact your work? And what are your early warning signs within work? Because they might be different to your early warning signs in your personal life. How would you know if you're becoming mentally unwell at work? Would it be a drop in performance, your timekeeping, your attitude, your appearance, all these types of things? But by encouraging people to have a voice in their own well-being and recovery, it's known to have a positive impact on that person. It's proven to have a positive impact on that person's well-being and recovery. So making sure that with these wellness action plans, as well as it being a focus for strength, actually somebody's got that support in place. You know, they know what they're good at, they know what they need to change, and they know what supporters they do have. It also means that if we get to a point where we are needing to have a conversation with somebody because we're concerned about their well-being, you know, we can ask them, do they have a wellness action plan? And we can look at, you know, what they said their triggers were, what they said would help them, what supports they have in their life, what strengths they have in their life, what hobbies, what interests, and actually we can start to change the kind of dynamic of that conversation as well. So we'll give you this away, and I would say certainly have a read up on WAPs and RAPs. You know, we'll send you on some links as well that can be really helpful about supporting people.
Hi Liam, it's Carmel.
Hi Carmel.
I've got a quick question here about the Wellness Action Plan.
Okay.
So Jenny's wondering if you would share the Wellness Action Plan with your whole team, or if it's more appropriate to just share it with your line manager.
I suppose just to be aware of which way you're asking that question, Jenny, I suppose if it's in regards to sharing the idea of a wellness action plan, I would share it with, you know, I would encourage everyone to have them, but your wellness action plan is very much an individual thing. It's for you. And it's not necessarily even for you to share, and certainly not with your team. I would encourage people to share it if they feel comfortable, you know. I wouldn't say it's certainly not mandatory for people to share. You know, I have a wellness action plan. A lot of it's now in my head, and a lot of it's on notes on my phone, and I've not shared that with anyone really. My partner, she knows about things that keep me well and things, but it's more for me as a resource for myself to go into and think, you know, actually I've said these are my triggers. You know, is my mental health starting to dipping? Right? What do I say I do to enjoy? What responsibility did I say I would take within the workplace? So it's more to get people thinking about their own well-being. It's not something that's necessarily gets shared throughout. One of the things I would say though is if you are including people in it who are going to be your mental health supporters, if you needed them to take action, it's also important that they're in that and they know that you have a mental health action. I suppose it'd be important for your manager and your family maybe to know that what you would want them to do if they've noticed you've started to become unwell, or what you found helpful and even what you've not found helpful in the past. So those types of bits of it you might want to share, but by all means I think this is as a personal thing for you to use for yourself. And it's more, I would share the idea, the concept of wellness action plans throughout the organisation and encourage people that they start taking ownership of this and action of this. And the page here shows, you know, what they similar sort of questions, but for their personal life as well. And as I say, we'll share those questions because your personal life and your work life will both impact the other one. So it's really important that we have that joint up approach to our well-being. So some helpful tips before we kind of move on to questions and answers and the kind of looking after ourselves. You know, as we've said through this, make sure we're listening. It's the biggest thing we can ask you to do. You know, if you don't know what to say, sometimes you can say nothing and just listen. You know, it's okay to not have the answer, so don't try and fix it. Know the supports that are available to you, you know, and what they do and don't offer. So that's management, it's human resources, it's your people team, it's your employee assistance program, it's your mental health first aiders, plus any external supports. Remember not to promise secrecy, and making sure you're seeking support for yourself, and always encourage conversation. And mental health conversations don't need to be deep and difficult, you know. Encourage, you know, mental health starts with well-being. You know, there's a whole spectrum of mental health and we all have it. So encourage that it's okay for people to do things that make them happy, and encourage that strength-based activity, but also make sure that people know that actually if you're ever struggling, I'm somebody you can come to, or these are the places you can go for support. Try to avoid things which we're really good at, and we sometimes do it because we're trying to be helpful, is things like negativity top trumps. And you know, somebody will tell us something and we'll say, oh, well, you think that's bad, wait till I tell you what's going on for me. Or we'll say things like, oh, you know, your colleagues have managed fine with that, others have much worse than you, it's not that bad, all these types of things. And sometimes that's a positive thing because we're trying to G them up, we're trying to say, you know, don't worry, it's not that bad, but actually that's not necessarily what they need to hear at that point. Regular or recurring conversations we often dismiss as not being as serious or not being as important. Oh, here we go again, you know, it's always this. every day, they're never happy, you know, so they're not serious. But actually always take that conversation seriously, always have that conversation as if it's the first time, I suppose, you're hearing some of those things. But also, you know, whilst I'm saying that, make sure we're drawing on the experience of conversations of the past. So if we're having that conversation again, you know, why are we having that conversation again? What didn't work last time that's meant we've had to have this conversation again? So trying to move them on again. One of the big assumptions that we're finding, and I see it a lot through kind of social media, through reports, is that because the majority of us are maybe, or majority of a team are maybe coping okay with working from home, that doesn't mean that everybody is. So being aware we're getting individual feedback from people in regards to working from home, especially as we maybe, and obviously follow company procedure and policy with that, especially as we maybe transition back to kind of gradually staff being back in offices. You know, we've seen schools and things being in offices, and you know, the impact that can have on teachers, you know, whilst having to socially distance from their colleagues and their peers can be really challenging, and the anxiety and things that struggles with that. Whereas a number of teachers I know say they're delighted to be back in the classroom and have that kind of face-to-face contact. So it doesn't always work the same for everyone. Don't try and fix things, and certainly don't keep it to yourself. You make sure you're getting yourself that support as well, because even if it's a positive interaction, it can be a challenging time for you. So for those of you who have been on sessions before, you know we're big on our 5 ways to looking after yourself and your own mental health. So you'll have seen this a few times, and I'm going to just go through it again because, you know, I think it's really important that we keep highlighting the message to support ourselves and look after ourselves, but also there'll be a number of people who maybe haven't seen this. So at SAMH, we believe there are 5 different topics that play a big part in your well-being. It's being active, taking notice, giving, keeping learning, and connecting. So being active, you know, it doesn't mean go out and run marathons and do huge amounts of, you know, exercise or energy experiments. It's trying to do more than we did last week. You know, it's trying to encourage us to go out for a walk, to, you know, if the journey we're making is a 15-minute walk or a 3-minute car ride, if it's a nice weather, could I go for a walk? Because actually physical exercise is known to improve your well-being and your mental health. Suggest taking notice of things can help. So take notice of the changing seasons. You know, I was out this morning and I noticed that already some of the leaves are starting to turn that kind of auburn colour. Now, for me, a huge part of my well-being is being out and about. I'm a photographer on top of what I do, and actually, you know, I love the changing seasons and the colours. So actually, by taking notice of that, it does a lot for my well-being. So take notice of your surroundings, take notice of the things you're grateful for in your life. Giving is proven to improve well-being as well. You know, so we've seen some great examples of that through lockdown, with people supporting each other, putting bins out, cutting grass, taking shopping to people, all these types of things, building virtual support communities for people who are isolated. And not only does that help those people, but actually it gives us that enormous sort of feeling of kind of self gratitude and support as well, and it can be really, really useful. So giving your time to a cause, volunteering, supporting others can make us feel really good about ourselves as well. It's proven to. Keeping learning, so they say we should learn something every day. Now that isn't necessarily you have to learn a new musical instrument or you have to learn a language. It can be little simple things. Somebody at the beginning of lockdown said that if you didn't learn a new skill during lockdown, then you'd failed because you had the time. And I think, you know, nothing could be further from the truth. Lockdown for many people was just about surviving it. You know, it wasn't about thriving during it. So you can't beat yourself up if you've had that time and you've not learned, you know, anything new. But it can be as simple as learning a new fact or a new topic each day. One of my friends, he reads the new, for his own well-being and his learning, he reads the Wikipedia article every day that's suggested to him. And he says the 90% of it's really, really boring, but actually it means he's learning something new every day. The last couple of sessions, I've given you a couple of facts or things that I can learn, because sometimes learning a new fact, and I'm struggling to think of one today. I'm trying to think what I learned recently. Oh yeah, I did learn this recently. So what is the longest, so have a look at your keyboards in front of you, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. I'm not expecting answers, but then I'll give you the answer. What is the longest word that you can write with a single line of your typewriter? And I'm using that language for a reason. Single line of your typewriter, what is the longest word? So, you know, you've got your QWERTY, you've got your ASDF, and you've got your ZXC lines. What is the longest word you can write with one of them? And as I was using the word typewriter, because the longest word you can write with that is actually typewriter. So there you go, useless fact for you, but you've learned something today. We have to connect with people, you know, as human beings, we're social creatures, you know, actually, whilst we sometimes being left alone, our connections with other people is really, really valuable. So make sure we're connecting with people, and especially with those people we might worry about in our teams, you know, make sure we're engaging in fairly regular one-to-ones, regular chats. It might be awkward for us, you know, we don't like seeing our own faces on the webcams, you know, none of us are quite as ugly as the camera suggests we are when we look through it sometimes, you know. It's like when you open the camera on your mobile phone and you suddenly realise how many chins you've got, you know. We don't actually look like that, it's unflattering angles. So we sometimes put off connecting, and especially connecting face to face or through the video, but make sure we are. And all these things do impact our well-being. We're going to take some questions. Before we do that, we're going to hand over to Carmel, and we're going to look at some feedback, and we'll take some time for some questions, and then Fiona's going to obviously finish off for as well. So Carmel, if I can hand over to you. So folks, what we have, for those of you who aren't here, is we have, I think, 6 questions we're going to ask you through a thing called Menti, and it's about your experiences of the session, but also about how we shape the next session, because the next session, the last one, is one that we have no plan for at the moment, because it's your session, so it's entirely up to you guys how you want it to be derived. Now, some of the feedback we got was that some of the questions, it doesn't let you put in more than one word, or it doesn't give you enough characters. So if you get to the question about the next session and you're struggling to fit it into Menti, if you write it into the chat box, because we'll make sure we collate that as well. So I'm going to hand over to Carmel to take us through this. Then she'll kind of facilitate any questions we might have for sort of 5 minutes or so, and then we'll hand back to Fiona. So Carmel, over to you.
Morning, everyone. So you can see on your screen a website link. If you can go to that website either through a smartphone or another tab on your computer, it's www.menti.com. And when you load up that site, your screen should look like the image we've got on the PowerPoint asking you for a code. And the code you'll enter also on the screen is 59 57 44 8. And we'll use this site to gather some anonymized feedback on the session and requests for webinar 4. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Oh, apologies, folks. The code is 67 67 76 5.
Carmel, do you want to just type that into the chat box and say it again? That would be great.
Okay.
So yeah, for those of you who didn't hear it, 67 67 76 5. Thanks, Carmel.
Okay. So I can see some of you are in there already.
So folks, seen some of the answers here. Brilliant that we've enjoyed it. Just when we're on this question, just to mention, you know, some of you saying more interactive, more kind of role playing and things, case studies, these types of things. Absolutely, we completely agree with that. These sessions as webinars where there's such a large number can be difficult to kind of make them more interactive, but Fiona at the end is going to mention some of the options going forward that we have for kind of smaller, more interactive sessions that you can involve yourselves in or you can involve your colleagues in. But great that you seem so keen and flagging these things. And again, this one, folks, which topic would you like to learn in session 4? If you're struggling, you don't have enough characters, obviously put it into the chat box. And for those of us that weren't able to access Menti, if we could type into the chat box what we would maybe like to see more about next week. And we appreciate you taking time to fill out these questions. I know it can be a drawn out process sometimes, but these sessions are absolutely for you. So if you can design them and you can pick up on the topics that you want us to speak about, then absolutely we'll try and deliver on that. You know, it has to be something that you guys want and feel that you need. So, you know, feel free to put anything in there and we'll try and come up with kind of common answers. We can't say that we're going to cover all of these things because mental health is such a vast topic, but we'll try and pick up some of the most common themes.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but the poll will remain open.
Just a couple of minutes because I'm keen. Obviously, we're 10 to, and Fiona's got some important information to obviously share and speak about before we run off. So, if anyone's got a question, please air it now. If not, we're going to hand directly over to Fiona.
We do have a few in the chat box. So we've got one from Philip regarding signposting, and he's asking, conditions such as Asperger's syndrome, which are associated with a higher incidence of depression, can add another dimension to a person's predicament. And are there any resources dealing specifically with such situations?
Yeah, great question. We do know that there are a number of things that can impact somebody's mental health, and Asperger's, autism, all these conditions can increase the impact that it has on somebody's mental health. So off the top of my head, in Aberdeen, I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you, but I would encourage you to have a look at what supports are available out there, both within your workplace. What sometimes we might have to do with things like this is ensure that our reasonable adjustments in the workplace are carried out with their needs in mind. My partner actually works for a company that supports people with autism, and they have a number of staff who have autism, and actually one of the things that some of their staff asked for was to be put on furlough, because they felt that actually the homework and they were really struggling with. So reasonable adjustments has to come and be led from them sometimes as well. So being aware of those things, and yeah, as I say, Philip, I can certainly have a look and see what supports are available within the Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire area and pass them on. But having a knowledge of those things can be really key. And perhaps something we can look at for next week's session is kind of list the resources and things that are available internally and externally. Absolutely. Anything else, folks, before we hand over to Fiona?
Hi guys, it's Fiona here. I think I'm just going to steal the show because I know we are dropping in numbers, and I just want to quickly check in with you. Any questions that are in that chat, we'll make sure that we go through excuse me, after this and come back to you. So it's just, again, I just want to share with you, I have gone through the chat today. So when Liam was talking about the mental health first aiders that we have available, I've popped on the links so that you can find the contact details for the network, as well as Liam was talking about a lot of people nowadays liking to talk on chat type tools. So just to emphasize that our employee assistance service have come on leaps and bounds during this lockdown period, and they are offering different ways to support people, one of them being the new chat service. They're finding that quite a lot of people are engaging using that. So if, it doesn't always have to be a telephone call. You don't have to give your name. You can just phone and see if there is the type of support that might be able to help you without committing to anything. So it's important just to let people know that services are there, and by all means, give them a call yourself. I've called them on a couple of occasions during this on behalf of other people, just to find out, how are they going to be received? What can they expect? So by all means, if you are supporting somebody, feel free to be the person that contacts that service and ask some questions for them, because sometimes it's quite daunting just to make that initial approach. But again, if I just share my screen with you, I've also put the links on there as well, but I'll just share my screen quickly to take you to the mental health. Oh, I'd like to share my screen with you. Isn't technology wonderful? I do seem to be having quite a funny day with I've dipped out a couple of times with, I think it's the wind, and now it seems to have, it's not wanting me to share my screen. So anyway, like I said, I've popped the links in the chat here. The link, if you go to the Wellbeing pages, you'll be able to find all this information, but I'm also putting out regular updates on the intranet. And within those updates, you'll be able to find the links to the previous webinars. This webinar will go out again very shortly when we plug a little bit about session 4. And please feel free, share them with your teams, encourage teams. I also had a little shout there from Derek McGowan, who is going to be, he does regular webcasts with his teams. And so he's asked me if I'll come along to his next one to promote some of the stuff that's been happening during these sessions as well. So if anybody else would like that opportunity, I'm more than happy to come along to anybody else's sessions. Okay, thank you everyone. If anybody wants to say anything else, just jump in now.
Thanks, Fiona. Love in the background there as well, Fiona. So yeah, and I'm glad I'm not the only one having technology issues. Just to finish off for me, folks, I just wanted to highlight that, you know, next week is Suicide Prevention Week. You know, so look out for, there'll be lots of messaging going out throughout Aberdeen and the Shire about that. We're working closely with, you know, all the agencies up there, and, you know, make sure take that opportunity to have some of those conversations and encourage people to speak out. It doesn't need to be a scary or daunting session. It can be as simple as letting people know that it is Suicide Prevention Week and there are supports out there if they need it. But thank you folks again for some great interaction and some great questions.
Thank you.